So I'm going to start off with some basics about running Call of Cthulhu that actually apply to other games too. And then we're going to go into the part where we actually design a scenario. Now, some of you may have been here last year when we did the Occupy Tibet scenario that came out of people in the audience. And apparently at least one guy wrote that scenario up. My son has a copy of it. Proof that it works. So let's talk about some things to make Call of Cthulhu scarier for your players. So a real basic thing, and this doesn't just apply to Call of Cthulhu, but to any role-playing game, is to use multiple senses. So it's really easy when you're describing a scene just to say, you see X, there is green stuff, just say what they see. But if you can use 2 or ideally 3 senses, you don't have to go overboard and try everything, but a couple more senses, it will seem more real to the players. For example, if you say there's an acrid taste in the air, you smell a terrible stench of rotten meat, you feel pounding coming up through the floor into your feet, all those things. And you'll notice that Lovecraft and other horror writers usually use a lot of these other senses. It just makes the event. For example, if you say the window shatters and they see a window shatter, you say the window explodes inward, they have a sound as well. Some of the shards hit you, cut you, then that's a feeling. Whenever you're describing something, 2 or 3 senses. It's something important. If they want you to talk about the takeaway curry across the street, you don't necessarily have to go into great detail. I mean, they know what those smell like, right? So just a thought. So multiple senses makes them more real. This works obviously in any role-playing game, but it's especially good in a horror game because you're really trying to get the guys into the feel of the game, because the more they feel like they're in a horror place instead of just like playing the game, the better it is. Now, there's an author called M.R. James that I reference all the time because he's Lovecraft's favorite ghost story writer and also mine, Montague Rhodes James, and he lived the life that Lovecraft wishes he had of a middle-class, stodgy English author and cleric. It's kind of tragic that that's what Lovecraft thought was a great life, but whatever. So what he wrote really good ghost stories. And what M.R. James did was he would write a ghost story once a year. For some reason, the English think that Christmas is the right time for ghost stories. Probably because they didn't have Halloween until recently. So they tell ghost stories at Christmas, and M.R. James would write a ghost story, and then he would go to his friends and he'd read it to them. So after 25 years of this, a friend says, dude, put these into a book. So he did. So we have various M.R. James collections. And the cool thing about M.R. James's collections is first, they're all meant to be read aloud. So that's super effective. And second, his ghosts are like hardly ever a vague form, a mystery thing. The closest he gets is a whistle that come to you where the ghost forms itself a body out of wrinkled linen, which is not quite the same as what we're used to. Anyway, he wrote an essay where he gave 3 rules for writing a good ghost story. And these rules also, as it happens, work for running a horror role-playing game. So first rule, don't use jargon. Now in his case, what he was talking about is don't talk about vibrations or the astral plane or anything that's going to seem like super dated 2 years from now. In the case of a role-playing game, I would say it's more like it's a game, so there's rule structure, but you can make clear that there is something beyond the rule structure. For example, if a monster attacks someone and injures him, one way of doing it is say, you got hit for 8 damage. Another way is the monster sinks his teeth into your shoulder, you're bleeding, your arm's caught, and he took 8 damage. And then he's thinking about the wound more than just the damage. And also later on in the thing, when going up a ladder, you can reference that. Not even to his detriment. Like if he fails a climb roll, you say, oh, your shoulder must be acting. Remember the guy bit it? And it'll make it seem more legit. Or you can even play off on something. You sure you want to try climbing because you got that hurt shoulder? And he's like, oh, and then you don't even have to inflict a penalty. But the point is that it seems like you're not using the jargon. Instead of just making a sanity roll, which obviously you still want to be doing because sanity is a great thing, in my opinion, as the designer of it. It's horror beyond belief. Your mind tries to escape into itself, and you got to make a sanity roll. And then when he makes it, if he like gets a terrible result, you'll say, "Holy smokes!" Like you're like your worldview shatters, you faint dead away, or whatever you want the sanity thing to be. And he's thinking more about what happened to him than the fact that he just lost 17 points, or whatever. So that's the don't use jargon. Second, he said the ghosts, or in our case, the monsters, or just the bad guys, you don't have to have monsters, obviously, but we always do, need to be malign. Now, this is not usually much of a problem in Call of Cthulhu, because we have some pretty malign entities out there. In ghost stories, it was different, because when M.R. James was writing them, there was all kinds of ghosts that just wanted to show you where their corpse was, or get someone to get the treasures that they buried without telling anyone, or something stupid like that. And M.R. James is like, no, the ghost has to be malign. He doesn't have to want to kill everyone in the world. You know, like maybe the ghost's goal is to guard this one place and kill anyone that goes there, but it's a murderous, malign thing. Now, Call of Cthulhu, like I said, usually not much of a problem, but I do see people that like try to whitewash the Migo or the Great Race of Yith. Oh, they aren't so bad. They're just another intelligent race. But the fact is they are pretty bad. And like the Great Race of Yith, which is the one I most often see them trying to defend as just another race, is like these guys literally exist by genociding entire intelligent species. That's what they do. So how good can they be? Right? So make sure your monsters are villainous. They're not just trying to do something good. Or if they are trying to do something good, it might have a really bad result in your player's point of view. He says, we've got this plan to stop the great old ones from coming through ever again. And all it requires is that we explode all the nuclear weapons in the world using this computer code that we've got. And you're like, well, yeah, sure. Or something I suggest in the Shadows of Yogg-Sothoth way back in the day was, what if they find out that there's a group of Nazis looking to stop Cthulhu as well? Or, you know, and then like, do you help the Nazis? Do you stop the Nazis? What are you going to do? They're trying to stop Cthulhu, who is, you know, objectively worse than the Nazis, but it doesn't make the Nazis good. And they're still a murderous Nazi. They might kill you on the way. Actually, that way they get an Iron Cross. Okay, so monsters malign. Third, put it somewhere in a plausible location. And what M.R. James said here was put it somewhere where your readers or your players could reasonably imagine themselves to be. Okay, don't set it in a Gothic cathedral at the top of the Ural Mountains. No one's ever gonna be there. Okay, put it somewhere where they can imagine themselves. Let me give you an example. I'm sure you've all watched Star Trek, and you've probably all watched Alien. Star Trek is a pristine, pure, very advanced space that none of us can imagine ourselves to be in. If you put a horror monster in Star Trek, you have a lot bigger burden to share the viewers. I mean, maybe you might be scared because they're attacking guys that you care about from the Star Trek show, but generally it's not going to be scary. It's going to be just a monster. Alien, although it's also in a spaceship, looks much more approachable. It's an old, rattly spaceship. There's condensation inside, dangling chains. The people in it, they bitch about their pay. You say, yeah, if I was in a spaceship, it would be that. It's like a gypsy tanker, you know, or transport. So even though they're both spaceships, and this were implausible for us, Alien feels more real. We can put ourselves there, you know. So M.R. James, who put his things in seaside resorts, you know, in library. He put in places that were real to him. He liked old libraries and churches because he hung around those a lot. We might place them more like in a shopping mall or whatever, but you put it somewhere the players can imagine themselves to be. Another example, of course, is a place people won't be, but it can be real. We have Carpenter's The Thing. It's in Antarctica, which, like, hopefully I will never be stuck in, especially with the monster outside, but they make it seem real by the way the characters act. That's harder for a game master, for a keeper to pull off, to make characters seem real to them. So you might want to be cautious about going to the Antarctic or somewhere unless you can find a way of making it be more authentic. So multiple senses, don't use jargon. Monsters are malign, put into plausible. So those are some basic rules that we can follow and will hold to in the course of this. We're going to design a Call of Cthulhu scenario. And by the end of this hour, we're going to have a full scenario, not every single word, but a full scenario laid out, ready to go that you can take home and write up or run with your players. And we're going to do it together, okay? I have no preconceived plan for this. Last time we ended up with Occupy Tibet. A time before then, we had a spa in Iceland or something. This is always different. That's kind of the fun of doing this. And this is how I do my scenarios. Except I don't have the help of a bunch of people to work with me on it. So hope that might be better than my scenarios I do on my own. On the other hand, I only have an hour to do it. And at home, I can spend more than an hour on a scenario. So kind of it's a wash. Okay, so what I do is I pick out 3 aspects. So I have a monster, I have a setting, and we're going to have a scene. So, a creature, raise your hand if you have an idea for one they want to see in this scenario.
A giant underground worm with acidic skin.
Okay, so you didn't raise your hand, so it's going to be the underground worm. No, all we get is the worm. Okay, this might not even be the main enemy in the scenario, it's just there's a worm. Next, we're going to go for a setting. So, I've had people say, in a Zeppelin. I mean, there's all kinds of black things. So, think of an interesting setting.
Fort Knox.
Fort Knox. Now, note that we are not wedded to these. I'm not saying Fort Knox isn't a great place to do it, but if we're doing this scenario, it becomes clear that it needs to not be Fort Knox, but Fort McHenry. We'll just change it, because this is our basic to start with. So we'll see if we do that, but we might. And now, lastly, we're going to have a scene, not a plot, a scene from a movie or a story. One of the best ones you ever did in the setting they had was the Velveteen Rabbit. And boy, was that a terrifying scenario. That was a scene. Yes, in the back. The Great Escape. And you're just thinking of the movie in general, not a particular scene. I mean, there's always Steve McQueen jumping over the fence, but there's also there's the prisoners carrying the dirt out and dumping it. There's also the whole view of the Great Escape, right? Got it. Okay, the Great Escape, Prison Break. Got it. Okay, this is what we're working with. Now here's the part where we look at this and see if we can get things settled into some kind of plot. Then we're going to be playing with it, moving things in and out until we end up with an entire storyline and a plan. The worm in Fort Knox seemed to be a good connection because it is something burrowed into Fort Knox or somewhere valuable, not necessarily Fort Knox. For example, what if it was burrowed into some kind of giant databank servers at the Pentagon or in Brussels, the NATO headquarters? We can do stuff with that, something valuable. You got a worm burrowing in. No one ever puts defenses against something burrowing up for obvious reasons. So that's kind of a cool thing. But then, the way the Great Escape triggers me at the moment, I'm thinking about it, and I'm trying to say everything in my brain is working so you can see how demented I am. I'm like, normally, if you had a scenario where the bad guy is trying to raid Fort Knox, okay, the climax of the whole thing would be the raid on Fort Knox, right? That's why Goldfinger ends with them trying to nuke Fort Knox, right? That's the climax. But if we have the Great Escape here, one thought I had is, what if the climax, like they raid Fort Knox, and the climax is them getting away with it. You're trying to stop their escape instead of you're trying to prevent the attack. Maybe you can't prevent the attack. And there's a lot of reasons that you couldn't prevent it. One is that you can't get anyone to believe you about the monsters coming to Fort Knox, and you can't get in there to stop it. So they're just going to get robbed. I like the idea of being focused on it because we come in afterwards then. In a sense, which might be interesting. So why does the worm or its handlers, I'm thinking the worm doesn't care about Fort Knox, right? Why would it? Unless it wants to disrupt U.S. economic policy for some reason, which I'm not sure why it cares between the U.S. versus any other country. Well, there's two possibilities. Either the worm is doing it for its own purpose. The problem is, if it's the worm, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe the worm has been dormant, but something's happened at Fort Knox that's kind of disturbed it, and it's not very sentient other than it's trying to get in there, see what's going on.
Okay.
There's also a tank battalion at Fort Knox. What happens if the tanks are bothering them?
The worm?
Yes.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. If it starts with the worm, it seems like it's going to be really hard for the players to do any research or investigation of what's going on. They're just going to suddenly there's a worm at Fort Knox. So I'm leaning towards someone's controlling the worm. Okay, if the players are held there somehow, then the obvious bad guys in this are going to be some of the people working at Fort Knox. They are the bad guys doing it, okay? Right? And so they're trying to call in the worm, then they're going to loot whatever they're trying to loot. Then they're going to escape, presumably, with the worm, and we have to break out and go find them and stop them. Okay, do we want the worm to be sentient, or do we want it to be a Chthonian? I mean, non-sentient, like a dole, or want to be a Chthonian? What do we want?
No.
What?
No.
Not sentient? So a dole. Let's say it's a dole, for the sake of argument. One of the advantages of a dole is that the player's emphasis isn't going to be on trying to kill it, because that's kind of hopeless. But maybe you can stop it somehow. Next, I like the idea of a biogenesis. What I'm thinking here is that the company Biomed, which is the name I always use for my generic biological companies in Call of Cthulhu, because it's the one they used in the scanners, which I liked. So someone here, the Biogenesis, he finds out how to direct a dole somewhere. And I'm guessing it's by some artifact, something, maybe of ancient repute. So what I'm thinking is that this guy, the Biomed guy, let's give him a name. Give me a name give me a villainous name for someone. Wait, it's your last name in the corner there.
R-O-T-T.
Dr. Rotz. See, that's pretty villainous sounding, don't you think? So Dr. Ross, you can change it if you write the scenario. By the way, a clever tip of naming characters in your scenarios and campaigns, especially if you no longer live in your old hometown, just use the names of the kids you knew in high school and junior high and grammar school. No one knows them, and they don't care if you use a name. So poor old Reggie Carlson that I haven't seen in 40 years has been a villain or a good guy or a murder victim in so many scenarios. Sorry, Reggie, that's the way it goes. And he was my friend. So go figure. Okay, Arthur has played in some of my games. I said, David Farnsworth did this, and Arthur knows David Farnsworth. He says, David wouldn't do that. I said, don't worry about it, Arthur. This is the character. So Dr. Watts, okay, and here we're going to have Colonel. Colonels always sound more villainous to me. So let's see. What's your last name?
Chandler.
Colonel Chandler, that kind of runs off the tongue, you know. Plus I live in Chandler's Landing, so there's that. So you should visit your namesake place. So Colonel Chandler and Dr. Watts. So they knew each other. Maybe they went to college together. Maybe they're second cousins or first cousins. They get in touch and Dr. Watts says, hey, you know what? I got this McGuffin. Y'all know what a McGuffin is, right? So we got the McGuffin, which will summon the worm to its place. Okay, it has to have the McGuffin. So he contacts Colonel Chandler and says, look, you get an excuse for me to go to Fort Knox. We can bring the worm there. It'll break in from below. We'll get all the gold and then escape with the worm. And then some other things happen and we'll live like kings. You know, a lot of bad mad scientists have that kind of thing. So these aren't even cultists necessarily. They're just going for the money, the quick money. Now, obviously they have some kind of cult or occult background because you know, they know about doles. So I'm guessing they probably went to Miskatonic University, because why not, right? I'm sure Miskatonic has an ROTC program. And an advantage of having to be from Miskatonic is that good old MU, go pods, right? That it gives them a excellent excuse for, it's not rare for players to actually have gone to Miskatonic or have a connection. So it gives them a better chance to say, oh yeah, you remember the guy Chandler. You heard he went into the Army. The Army runs Fort Knox, right? Okay. This is probably not the guy in charge of the tank battalion, but it's cool there's a tank battalion because the idea of a 100-foot length of worm coming out of the ground with tanks shooting at it is really cool. I like that a lot. I mean, I don't think they're going to kill it with tanks, but at least it might not like it. We got Dr. Rotz has found a McGuffin. We'll worry about the McGuffin later because this gives us a first chance for our players to get involved. And this is a really critical part of any Call of Cthulhu scenario, which is that it's a giant pain in the ass to get the players involved in the scenario. Okay, because they always have something else going on. Because they're these quirky, eccentric guys that are private eyes, so you have to hire them, or they're a professor somewhere, so they have to get time away. You know what kind of jerks that play Call of Cthulhu. Okay, so you have your players, and you'll have to adapt this to your players. If you have players that are involved with Miskatonic University, then you can have some of them know about keeping tracks on Dr. Rotz, because he was always kind of a sketchy guy. Spent a little bit too much time in the rare books room at MU library, you know, and you can have someone that was in the military in some way. They could know about Colonel Chandler. If someone's rolling up a new character, hey, you're a tank commander at Fort Knox, you know, or not. But one possibility is that we start with them trying to get the McGuffin. And I like the idea of it being like the Hungarian crown jewels. They have some artifact in Hungary. Well, I was thinking the shining dodecahedron, but your idea is better. What was it? The Crown of St. Stephen. Why would that be particularly Lovecraftian, though? I'm not sure. And why does the dole want it? I mean, we could always wave our hands and say, who knows why the dole wants it? It just does. But it's good if we get a reason.
Assume the McGuffin controls the dole.
What kind of machine would control a dole? If it has to, I don't think doles are controllable, because if they were, the Idithians would have controlled them. So here is the biological cycle of doles according to Sandy Petersen. And you don't have to use it, but I think it works out and makes sense. So we know that when Lovecraft first wrote about the doles, he called them bowls, B-H-O-L-E, and Farnsworth Wright changed it to dole. So in the S.T. Yoshi editions of the rules, when they go to the Dreamlands, there's bowls burrowing in the dark, okay? We also know that ostensibly there's not these things on Earth, because if there were, they'd be destroying it. And there's the things that were on Yadith that absolutely destroyed the planet. But the Doles in the Dreamlands are not destroying it. They're just huge things burrowing in the Vale of Panath. So here's what I came up with. I said, so the Boles are the larvae of the Doles. Okay, the Doles live on a planet and they spawn their young into the Dreamlands. And then when the young get old enough, they drop out of the Dreamlands to a planet, usually one where there's already some Doles. And that's how you get new Doles. No, they aren't breeding. Our universe only has adult Doles. Okay, I mean, they can grow after they're an adult, I'm sure. And then those things will breed. So one of the other things this solves is Doles aren't sentient. They can't go through space. When they destroy the planet, what happens? Well, the Doles die. But they bred a bunch before they die, and those things are in the Dreamlands, and they can go to other planets and out of the universe. So Doles can literally show up on any planet, though I think there's a tendency to go to a planet that's already inhabited. And then the Boles are in the Dreamlands. So this particular creature could either be a Dole that they're bringing to Earth. Because there's only one Dole, it might need this device in order to reproduce asexually. Normally they want to get it on with another Dole, I would say, like earthworms do. So let's see how the players can get involved in this. So we got the fungal device. The Migo brought it to the Harz Mountains because the Harz Mountains are known to be haunted. They're not far from Hungary. And someone took it and figured out what it was and put it in a Faraday cage in the Hungarian royal castle. All you know what a Faraday cage is? Okay, so it keeps it from broadcasting signals to the Dreamlands. So I guess not really a regular Faraday cage. It's more of like a Randolph Carter cage. But yes.
I'm thinking if it's in a Faraday cage, if the cage is broken and this thing has dream world connections, it causes strange dreams in sensitive people.
Yes, and that may be what actually summons the Dole. So here's the step one. Do we want to have it be in Hungary? Is that appealing to everyone? We get to go to Budapest. Okay, so we have the, we should probably give it a name. Cheap solution, look up a Hungarian word. So I'm gonna go for fungus gem, gombasium. So there's a thing known there in a Faraday cage that oh, look how quaint, they built a Faraday cage. It's in some museum, whatever they have in Budapest for the old royal stuff. So the first step is the villains are stealing it. Then they have to get it to Fort Knox in time for it to bring in a Dole. Then when the Dole erupts in Fort Knox, this is the bad guy's plan. Steal. And this may be where the players get involved when it's stolen. Okay? Hungary is part of NATO. Colonel Chandler's there. Dr. Watts is visiting with them because they're going to work together on it. And the players, we have to figure out a way to get them to Hungary to be there when that happens and start to figure out what's going wrong. So the players have a number of things they can do here. They can witness the after effects of the theft. Pardon? An auction? Well, they're going to sell the Gumbasem. The players are going to do a heist? Yeah, the bad guys are doing a heist. So you think they're auctioning off the Gumbasem? They could. The players are there to buy something else. That makes it easier for them to be there when it happens. Okay, now, as we know, when I was designing Call of Cthulhu, I knew I had to have something to replace combat because the weakest monster in Call of Cthulhu is a match for a human. I mean, the weakest monster is literally a cultist, and cultists are just as good as a human, plus better organized and more ruthless. So I needed to have not combat. So what I came up with, as you also all know, is investigation. Okay, so we have a lot of cool stuff to investigate. We can investigate the gem, and we can investigate the people. So when the thing is stolen, and this could be pretty spectacular, they're at the auction, and they're going to buy some tedious thing like a Necronomicon, you know, or something. Hey, you have a chance to buy a Necronomicon here. This is a really good way to throw them off. Because one of the ways to get people involved is to give them something that you know they want and to kind of throw them off a little bit, because if they go in there and they're like, ooh, we get to have our own copy of the Necronomicon, someone in your group's going to want a copy of the Necronomicon, right? So we can get a copy of the Necronomicon. They also have this dumb Gombasem thing, which who knows, right? So they're thinking they're going to have this whole adventure about the Necronomicon they just got, or the scroll that's supposed to summon a dimensional shambler, or whatever thing you know your players, something they'll want. Oh, this is the magic sword of Paracelsus. You know, it's supposed to be able to kill non-tangible beings. Well, they want that, right? So they're going there for that. They got the money together. The dilettante is the money bags, And everyone's going for a trip to the place. And the first day, the first half hour or so of the adventure is they're bumming around Budapest. And then they go to the auction. They're getting ready to bid on the Sword of Paracelsus or the Necronomicon or the boots, 7 League boots or whatever. So the auction is going to have security guards. I don't want to have them just steal it before the auction. I want to have a spectacular scene at the auction house with bloodshed. And so now our soldiers, obviously, this guy has access to soldiers. They can actually outgun anyone that's going to be a security guard at an auction. What I'm thinking is that he disguises himself. He gets some soldiers. First, the colonel goes to the, there's got to be Americans based in Hungary somewhere, right? It's a part of NATO. So they go to an American base or a Hungarian base, and they either bribe or trick people into releasing weapons to them. And this is important because it gives the players something to research. They can find out someone did this. And the colonel's got to cover his tracks because he has to be able to go back to America and still not be tarred with the brush of villainy, at least not too directly. I'm thinking he gets a bunch of guys in balaclavas, basically, to show up with MP5s and outright steal the Gambazem. And depending on how subtle your players are, either they leave all the other priceless artifacts behind because they don't care about that, or they take some of them and then those are later found like discarded in the dumpster because they didn't care about them. 2 different levels of discovery. So the players see this. Maybe the guys open fire on the audience to make the secret guys duck and cover to cover their tracks more and pretend it was a terrorist attack. I don't know what kind of terrorists strike Hungary nowadays, but something. And then they're leaving. Okay, they went out with the Gambazem, and the players are like, why did they want the Gambazem? It's like the stupid thing. It's only cool because the Faraday cage is the cool part. It's a 16th century Faraday cage. How do they even know about Faraday cages? The 2 directions of research are they look up what the Gambazem is, and they find, and you unleash to them the story of where it came from, which is the fungi in the Harz Mountains, which is another story because they can go, oh, it was found in the Harz Mountains with basically flying crabs from outer space. Players are going to pick up on that. They're going to realize that this is a fungus thing. They look up more about it. Maybe you can lead them down a road of trying to talk to the fungi's cult, because they have a cult on Earth. Not really a cult, more of like a secret society, and find out what this thing does. So that's one branch they can go. And the other branch is they start to look up and say, these guys stole the guns for this purpose and sealed the Gambasem. They left town. Where'd they go? Maybe on this plane. So we have 2 different ways of researching it. And now the players are on the path, because once they realize that this thing makes a dole come to Earth. Now I'm going to assume for the sake of argument that maybe what the thing does is it eats the Gambazem, and then its presence brings in more doles over time. So this first stage 1, the Gambazem is stolen. The guys in balaclavas with submachine guns are shooting people, and they're getting it, and they're running out. And another interesting thing I really like about this scenario is the bad guys, for a change, aren't cultists. They have understandable real-world motives that are even kind of not defensible, but it's like, well, I'll be rich beyond my wildest dreams. I'll have hundreds of millions of dollars. And yeah, the Earth is destroyed in 200 years, but who cares, right? I'll let my great-grandkids worry about that. So they find out that it's stolen, and now the next step is to the fort. And this doesn't mean they go directly to the fort. The players need to feel like they're in control. So maybe they're researching at Fort Knox. Maybe they're finding some guy in the FBI. Now, if they get themselves allies within the government, then what I would say is a good thing to do is for you to somehow squash or repress those allies early on in the scenario. Like maybe they're murdered by the colonel's dudes. I mean, if you're gonna get $1 billion, then you can afford to give some guy $50 million to help you, and he's like, that's it. You have him body and soul, right? The whole point of going to the fort is we're gonna go to the fort and we're gonna be taken prisoner at some point. At least some of us are. If the players find some really clever way of not all being taken prisoner, then more power to them. Somewhere on the inside, somewhere on the, of course it makes you kind of break up the party, but whatever, you know, you can handle it. So they go into the fort. They may not know that the colonel is the bad guy yet, or they might. I don't know. Kind of depends on what the players do. But another way of doing it, this is the classic betrayal scenario. They get someone they think is on their side, and he says, come meet this guy. And they walk into the room, and it's the colonel, and they say, my friend, why did you betray us? And he said, I betrayed you for $50 million. That's what I'm being promised. And $50 million is a lot of money to assuage my conscience. He may even initially offer money to the players. I'll give you each $10 million. The problem with that is if the players are cynical enough and they take the money, then your scenario kind of ends. And you say, oh, well, I guess the world's going away in 200 years. So hopefully they will not want to destroy the world. When they're prisoners, now here's the really great part about being prisoners at Fort Knox. Might have some kind of hold for drunken soldiers or something, but they don't really have a jail in there as far as I know. And of course, the colonel doesn't want them taken into town to be held at the jail there for trespassing or whatever, he's got to keep it hushed up. He doesn't want these people to tell anyone what happened. So he's going to find basically a room in Fort Knox that's not being used and lock him in there and put some of his goons at the door. And this gives the players a lot of choices about how to escape. He doesn't want to kill him for some reason. And hey, why am I thinking about the reason? I've got you here to think of the collective unconscious. Why isn't he killing him right away?
Because you need sacrifices to activate the McGuffin.
And he also is kind of scary to kill him on the base. Sacrifice, which you can threaten him with. He says, look, I need sacrifices to activate the Gambazem, but I don't need all of you. That kind of puts him paid, okay? Also, shooting him on base and trying to move the bodies out. Most of the guys on Fort Knox are not in on this, right? If you're offering $50 million to each helper, even if you're getting $1 billion, it does kind of run out after a while. I guess 20 guys is all you get if you use all the money. And of course, if they kill you when the dole comes, who cares if they catch you? Because they're busted then. Everyone knows they were the bad guys. So they don't care then. And so the next thing is the escape. And this part, I'm going to let you and the players deal with. They're in a room. Maybe they're in an auditorium just like this. Pick a room all the players have been. For me, I picked this room. You're in here. There's guards at the back doors and they're locked. There's guards at the front doors and they're locked. How do you get out? Then the players are like, well, let's see if we can get to those the air vents. Because we know that every single place and everywhere has giant air vents you can practically walk down. So that's good. If you can't think of a way to get them out, I do have some ideas that just sprung to me from what you guys said, which is, what if the MeGo are sending something to try to get the Gambazem back? Because they don't want the Doles to come right away. They have plans for Earth for 250 years. Then they can come. But for now, they want the Earth okay. So, and this doesn't make them good guys, because the best way to get the thing back and not telling them about it is to kill every single person around, including the PCs. They have no need for you to know about the Goombazem, okay? So they're gonna kill everything. So imagine that if the players can't figure a way out, or even if they can, okay, the MeGo come one night and there's a battle between soldiers, and we know that guns will work on the Funjar from Yuggoth. I mean, the dude kills one with a shotgun or the rifle in the story. We also know they don't really care if they're killed because they're just funguses, you know? They can just carve another one out of a big block of matter back on Yuggoth and get some more. The soldiers are shooting the MeGo. The MeGo are fighting with their hideous alien technology, which you guys can make up. And if the players have escaped on their own, or some of the players are breaking in from outside, trying to get, maybe they know some of the guys in the tank battalion or the buddies with them, they're gonna let them in. Maybe they even convince someone. Then they are doing this, I think, during the MeGo raid. And if the players don't escape, then the MeGo raid gives them their chance to escape. You know, maybe they hear a ruffling at the door, and then they open it, and the buyer, and then the MeGo are there, and then the MeGo want to kill them. So they have to grab guns from the downed guards and fight. And then they're running through Fort Knox. The power's out. Maybe there's a backup power going, but I wouldn't be surprised if the MeGo can dampen that. So there's winged MeGo running all around. They probably won't be able to bring their cultists there to Kentucky, but we have MeGo, we have the soldiers. They're trying to get the Goomba. My expectations here are that it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket. And that's a super exciting scene with monsters and horror and death and everyone taking tons of sand dice. They suck their faces off, or whatever MeGo do. Something bad. I guess they take your brain. But the only brains in a can they want are going to be Dr. Rotz and Colonel Chandler. No one else matters to them here. Everyone else they just want dead. Well, they can be killed by guns. The stats in Call of Cthulhu make them a little resistant, so it's not trivial to kill them. But also, their primary purpose here isn't the PCs. So there'll be lots of cases where you'll see them going after a squad of soldiers, and you're just kind of there. And maybe if you save some of the soldiers, if they're not like corrupt soldiers, they might be grateful. And from here, we can either lead into, we've escaped, now we have to catch the colonel, or the colonel, knowing the jig is up, and we got the MeGo coming, he says, we got to activate it now. And so, at this point, who's more evil, Colonel Chandler or Dr. Rotz? Vote. All in favor of Dr. Rotz being the most evil. All in favor of Colonel Chandler. Looks like Dr. Rotz to him. Dr. Rotz, to trigger it, sacrifices Chandler. And, right? Take one for the team, Colonel. Okay? And this is actually good in two ways, because Dr. Rotz actually doesn't know the layout of Fort Knox as well. He can't command the troops. So it makes it a little tougher for him, which gives the players another chance. They're running through Fort Knox. It's falling apart. Hey, it's getting late, guys. We'll come back next week and we'll play this again, right? I often break up huge things like that way in my game because they end on a high note, kind of. But we aren't going to break this up. We're going to keep going. So then the dole comes. The earthquake starts rumbling as the dole's coming up with its huge jaws. So our Dr. Rotz's plan is when the dole comes, he probably hasn't thought this part of the plan out very much. He's doing it prematurely, right? He's being forced, his hand is being forced by the Mi-Go. And the Mi-Go at this point, I'm thinking, are losing the fight because there's a tank battalion. I mean, sure, they can send 500,000 Mi-Go from Yuggoth, but how long does that take to get here? So you only have what they have in America right now, which is maybe not that many. And a couple hundred Mi-Go are not going to take down the tank battalion, in my opinion. They're going to be scary, you know. They'll probably take out some of the tanks. They'll freeze them solid or something, whatever their cool technology is. And I'm not specifying it because you can use any kind of horror alien technology you want. But I do remember using frost rays when I first did a Mi-Go scenario, so that's a possibility. And we know that, like the old ones, for example, were able to fight wars against Cthulhu and the Star Spawn and against the Mi-Go. I'm not saying they won the wars, but they weren't just helpless. So we have this fight, then the dole comes out, and at this point, I don't know what's going to happen. The players know that Colonel Chandler's killed. Maybe they get to the place where he's got to do it in some large central area. And since I don't know anything about what Fort Marx is laid out, I'm going to assume that it's exactly like in the movie Goldfinger. Right? Okay, so there's that big central thing where the Chinese put the time bomb. If you have better knowledge about it than me, then you can put whatever you want. And that's where the players break in. Haha, you've been foiled. Oh, no, I haven't, says Dr. Rotz, and sacrifices Chandler to his amazement. You hear the rumbling, and Rotz is running around. You're trying to chase him. Maybe you're shooting at him, and he's probably wearing a bulletproof vest by now. He's like, he knows there's shooting going on, and the Mi-Go and everything there, and then the dole bursts up. And I'm thinking that when the dole emerges, the Mi-Go immediately leave because they have failed. They didn't stop the dole from coming. And there's no point in sticking around because they don't have enough stuff to handle a dole. So they're out of here. And so now it's just the dole, the army, and you guys. So the army's going to have to fight this dole towering 200 feet up into the air. Maybe not that big. It's a brand new adult dole. I don't know how big those are. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet? Still big. Okay, I know how big it is. It's exactly the size you will want to impress your players with. That's the size. So it towers up, breaks over the top of Fort Knox. Gold bars are scattered everywhere. The thing's there. And our hero, with the remaining thugs, which he still has thugs, who now have to obey him instead of Chandler because he killed Chandler. A side benefit of killing Chandler is that you command the thugs now, right? Because they have no one else. They have to, right? Get the gold bars, pile them into the crates. Strap them onto the worm. So now the players, some of the players can be liaising with the tank battalion. Shoot at that thing. You know, try to get the dudes that are sort of ride it. Some of you guys could be chasing around Rotz and his, man, your name is just great for a villain. They're going to think that I just made it up. What nationality is that from? Germany? Figures. A lot of evil guys come from Germany. My wife is mostly German, so I'm well aware of their villainy. Some of you guys are chasing Rotz and fighting his guards. There's a hole also probably emanating waves of force or insensate maw gaping. There's all this action, but it shouldn't just be action. It's got to be horror. So the whole squishing things, the people shooting, but it is kind of ending a giant kaiju battle. But it's your fault for giving us a giant worm. So this is the end scene, and either the tank battalion kills the worm and you stop Rotz, or if you fail to stop Rotz, if you kill Rotz, I say the tank battalion kills the worm, and it's a huge fiery inferno, like the end of a kaiju movie where you win. If you don't get Rotz, the players that is, he escapes on the worm, and now you have a guy who has some power over the whole and $1 billion in gold to be a super awesome villain for your next game. Or maybe 2 games down the line when they've forgotten about him. Meanwhile, the army is really busy covering up what happened at Fort Knox. So that is the scenario. What do you think? You guys all look. You saw my brain work around it, but it was your guys that came this up. What are we going to call it? A worm in Fort Knox? What?
The rumble below.
The rumble below.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, by the way, one thing is, it'd be cool if having the thing made the rumbling so it was earthquaking closer and closer, but it doesn't actually erupt till the sacrifice, and then it goes and gets the Goomba. So you have rumbling, and you kind of play that into the earlier stuff. There's like, hey, there's earthquake activity in Kentucky. And you're like, okay. We looked up that Dr. Rotz is like all about that this Goomba, I keep calling it the Goomba, but that's not my fault. It's Hungarian's fault. is Goomba has the associated with doles and their life cycle, and Dr. Watts studied them, and there's earthquakes, and we had to get there, and then we're going to be in prison, and we can't stop anything, and then the Migo come, and you have all this stuff. This is a somewhat more action-oriented, but there's still plenty of room for horror. And it's not like action is bad. It's my belief that if you combine action with horror, you end up with an action movie that has horror elements. Like Aliens is an action movie with horror elements, whereas Alien is a pure horror movie. But that's not like that's a bad thing. Predator is an action movie with horror elements. Oddly enough, if you combine comedy with horror, you can end up with a horror movie that has comic elements, as long as you keep the horror straight. And that's the way to do a good horror comedy, folks, is that the horror has to be straight. Don't make the monsters funny. Shaun of the Dead didn't make the monsters funny. Well, maybe a couple of them a little bit funny. Abbott and Costello beat Frankenstein. The monsters aren't funny. I mean, they're goofy because they want to take Costello's brain and put it in the Frankenstein monster, but that is a pretty gruesome thing to do. And Dracula plays it straight. And the greatest horror comedy of all time, Mr. Vampire, the monsters are straight. And if you haven't seen Mr. Vampire, you're in for a treat because it's the greatest horror comedy of all time. And that's what I got, folks.